3 bullets. 3 bodies. 3 seconds. Lorenzo Vitelli did not blink. The private lounge above the casino floor smelled of cigar smoke, spilled whiskey, and fresh blood. Gold light from the chandelier hit the marble table where the dead man lay sprawled, one hand still twitching near a silver dessert fork. Outside the soundproof glass, the casino glittered below, women in sequins, men in tailored suits, cards snapping against velvet, laughter rising like a lie over the city's rotten bones. Inside, silence ruled. "You sold my roots to Nero," Lorenzo said, his voice as smooth as poured brandy. "That insulted me." The traitor, Arturo Bellese, fell to his knees, face gray, lower lip trembling. "Don Lorenzo, please." The gunshot cracked before the plea finished. Matteo Caruso, Lorenzo's consigliere and oldest friend, did not flinch either. Rocco DeSantis stepped forward to drag the body away while Lorenzo set the pistol on the table like a wineglass after dinner. Black suit. Black tie. White cuffs untouched by blood. The devil had better tailoring, Saraphina Vale thought from the shadows beyond the half-open service door. She had not come to watch a man die. She had come for the ledger hidden in Lorenzo Vitelli's office safe. Her pulse battered her ribs as she pressed flat against the paneled wall, feeling the cool lacquer beneath her bare shoulders, where her midnight blue gown dipped too low for comfort, and entirely too low for burglary. She had pins in her hair, a knife strapped to her thigh, and the memory of fire in her lungs. 7 years ago, men with Vitelli and Nero money had burned her home, killed her father, and left her with ash under her nails and a new religion: revenge. Tonight she was supposed to steal proof. Instead, she had found the king. Voices approached. She slipped through the service door and into the office beyond the lounge, moving fast over Persian rugs and dark wood polished to a mirror shine. The room smelled of leather, bergamot, gun oil. A floor-to-ceiling window looked over the harbor where the water flashed black under the moon. On the far wall, a painting hid the safe. Her fingers shook only once. Then training took over. Pin, tension, turn. Behind her, footsteps. She swung around with the knife already in her hand. Lorenzo Vitelli stood in the doorway. Up close, he was even more dangerous. Tall. Beautiful in the cruel way cathedral statues were beautiful. Something carved for worship and fear. His hair was dark as wet ink, his gaze a hard amber brown that caught everything. He looked at the blade in her hand, then at the open safe, then finally at her face. "Well," he said softly, "you're not a cocktail waitress." Saraphina lifted her chin. "And you're not as subtle as people say." A corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "No one says I'm subtle." The first shot through the window exploded the room into chaos. Glass burst inward in a screaming rain. Lorenzo lunged, catching her around the waist just as a second bullet punched into the wall where her head had been. They hit the floor hard. She smelled him instantly. Smoke, starch, expensive cologne, violence. His hand covered the back of her skull. His body shielded hers. The impact stole her breath. "Sniper." Matteo shouted from the lounge. Lorenzo rolled, dragged Saraphina behind the heavy desk, and reached for the gun at his back. A third shot tore across the office. Lorenzo hissed. Blood spread dark over his side. Saraphina reacted before sense could stop her. She grabbed the silk sash from her gown, yanked his jacket open, and pressed the fabric hard against the wound. He stared at her, surprised for the first time since she'd seen him. "If you want to interrogate me, don't bleed out first," she snapped. Outside the office, men thundered into motion. Orders cracked in Italian. Chairs overturned. Somebody screamed below on the casino floor, as security rushed to lock down the exits. Sirens had not started yet, but they would. The city always arrived late to Lorenzo Vitelli's disasters. His big hand closed around her wrist. "Who are you?" "No one you want to know." That answer usually means the opposite. He rose in one controlled movement despite the blood. Saraphina stood too, knife still in her grip, heart hammering as he looked her over with terrifying patience. He noticed everything. The cheap callus on her thumb from lockpicks, the scar near her collarbone, the slit in her gown made for movement instead of seduction. Matteo burst in. Rooftops are being cleared. Nero men on the north building. We got two. Lorenzo never took his eyes off her. And this one? Saraphina smiled without warmth. Try me. Then she drove the heel of her shoe down onto his instep, twisted free, and ran. She flew through the office, across the lounge, down a corridor lined with black and gold wallpaper. Men shouted behind her. The casino floor opened in a blaze of crystal and neon, roulette wheels spinning, chips clattering, music stuttering to a stop as panicked guests rushed the exits. Perfume, champagne, fear. She darted between tables, vaulted a toppled chair, nearly made the stairwell. Rocco blocked her path. She slashed. He caught her wrist. She kneed him hard enough to grunt, but Lorenzo was suddenly there, one hand bandaged with her torn sash, eyes burning. Enough. The word hit like a slammed door. She fought anyway. Elbow. Heel. Twist. Lorenzo absorbed all of it, then pinned her against a marble column with brutal care, not crushing, just immovable. His palm bracketed her jaw, warm, steady, dangerous. You broke into my office, he murmured. Then saved my life. Then tried to gut my head of security. I am very curious, Bella. I'd rather die than tell you anything. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The casino lights threw gold into his irises. For one insane second, the air changed, tightening with heat so sharp it felt like a wound. Then his thumb brushed the pulse leaping in her throat. Don't make promises you can't keep. Men closed in around them, guns out, faces hard. Somewhere outside, tires squealed. Somewhere above, a helicopter chopped at the night. The city was moving around Lorenzo Vitelli's will now, folding inward like a fist. Saraphina looked from the armed circle to the blood still soaking his shirt and knew the truth with cold clarity. She had not stolen from a king. She had walked straight into his cage. Lorenzo leaned down, his mouth close to her ear, his voice low enough that only she heard it. You're not going anywhere. Saraphina had once lived in a fourth-floor walk-up that smelled of coffee grounds, radiator heat, and the old roses her neighbor kept dying slowly in cracked ceramic pots. That life felt obscene now. In that life, mornings began with the scrape of her studio key, the buttery scent of linseed oil, the dust of old canvases and gilt frames under her fingertips. She restored damaged paintings for a museum downtown. Quiet work, patient work, the sort that required steady hands and a lie on every form she signed. Saraphina Vale, freelance conservator, no family, no past worth naming. At night she trained at a boxing gym under an old retired cop who asked no questions. On weekends she hunted ledgers, whispers, and men who remembered the fire. Now she woke in Lorenzo Vitelli's mansion. The room alone was bigger than her apartment had been, high ceilings crossed with dark beams, floor-to-ceiling curtains the color of storm clouds, a carved bed heavy enough to survive a siege. Rain tapped softly against tall windows, and somewhere distant she heard men's voices, clipped and alert, and the dull electronic chirp of a security system expensive enough to invade small countries. A silver tray waited on a side table, espresso, fruit, warm pastries. Captivity, apparently, came with excellent catering. Saraphina slid from bed and found her dress replaced by black silk pants and a cream blouse laid neatly across a chaise. No shoes, no knife. Her thigh holster gone. Her hairpins gone. Of course. The lock clicked. Lorenzo entered without knocking, because men like him mistook power for permission. He had changed into charcoal slacks and a white shirt rolled at the forearms. Fresh bandaging showed beneath the open collar where the sniper's bullet had grazed his side. He carried pain like another luxury accessory, expensive, controlled, invisible unless he wanted you to notice. You slept 11 hours, he said. You counted? I count everything in my house. She poured herself espresso and met his gaze over the cup. Bitter heat bloomed on her tongue. Then count this. I'm leaving. No. Such a small word. Such absolute force. You can't keep me here, his brows lifted, I already am. Anger flashed hot through her. You think because you have armed men on every door and a mansion that smells like sin and old money that makes this legal? Lorenzo leaned against the doorway, watching her with maddening calm. Bella, nothing in my world is legal. Efficient, yes. Necessary, usually. Legal? Rarely. He handed her a folder. Inside were photographs. Her apartment building, her studio, a grainy shot of her entering the casino last night in a wig she'd discarded before the gala. Another of her buying ammunition 3 weeks earlier under a fake name. Ice spread down her spine. I had you searched, he said. You are very skilled at being invisible. Which interests me. She closed the folder. And if I stay uninteresting? Too late. Rain deepened outside, carrying the mineral scent of wet stone through a barely open window. The room felt too intimate, too still. Lorenzo's gaze tracked every shift in her breathing, every tension in her shoulders. Predators knew when prey wanted to bolt. She set the cup down carefully. Your men stripped me of weapons. One weapon remained. What? His eyes darkened as they moved over her face. That mouth. Heat flared, unwanted and immediate. Saraphina hated that her pulse betrayed her. Hated more that he saw it. He crossed the room slowly, like he was approaching something feral and beautiful that might bite. There was a second team on the roof last night. Not Nero's usual shooters. Professionals. They were there for you. That's convenient. It is inconvenient, he corrected softly, because it means someone inside my circle knew exactly where you'd be. The implication landed heavy. She wasn't only in danger because she'd stolen from Lorenzo. She was in danger because she was connected to something worth killing for. He stepped closer. Too close. Tell me your real name. No. Tell me what was in my safe that mattered more to you than survival. No. Tell me who trained you to use that knife. Her silence sharpened. A flicker of approval crossed his face. There you are. She moved fast, shoving him hard with both hands and aiming to slip past. He caught her by the waist before she made 2 steps. The contact detonated through her. His palm spanned her hip. Her back hit his chest. Hard muscle, steady heat. His breath touched the sensitive skin below her ear and turned her fury treacherous. Let go of me. No, you don't scare me. A pause. Then, against her hair, almost amused, lie better. She elbowed him. He grunted but didn't release her. Instead, he turned her in his arms until she faced him, trapped between his body and the edge of the dresser. Close enough to see the fine scar through his right eyebrow. Close enough to smell espresso and cedar in the rain he'd brought in on his cuffs. His voice dropped. Listen carefully, cara mia. Outside these walls, men are hunting you. Inside these walls, I make the rules. I'm not your possession. Good. His hand rose, thumb brushing her cheekbone with a tenderness that felt more dangerous than a slap ever could. Possessions are replaceable. The air changed again. Thickened. A live wire pulled taut between them. For one suspended heartbeat, neither moved. Then Saraphina lifted her chin and said the stupidest thing possible. Maybe I liked your safe more than I like you. Lorenzo's mouth curved for real this time. Slow, wicked, devastating. Impossible. My safe doesn't blush. She shoved him again just to prove she could. He let her, laughing under his breath, but when she reached the door, he caught the back of her blouse lightly and reeled her in. Not rough. Certain. His lips brushed her ear. Breakfast in 10 minutes. Security lesson after that. You'll stay where I can see you. I'd rather starve. You won't. And if I refuse? That beautiful, cruel calm returned in full. Then I'll carry you downstairs myself, sit you at my table, and remind everyone in this house exactly who you belong to while you glare at me over toast. Her stomach betrayed her with a twist she refused to name. The rain eased. From below came the muted clink of china, the scent of garlic and fresh bread beginning to drift through the halls, and beneath it all the deeper pulse of the house. Guarded doors. Loyal men. Hidden guns. Old vows. A kingdom built on blood. Lorenzo released the fabric of her blouse and stepped back just enough to let her breathe, though not enough to let her feel free. Then he said it, low and unshakable, a line cast like iron around both of them. "I own your danger now." The Vitelli estate sat above the harbor like a threat. From the terrace, Saraphina could see Lorenzo's world in layers, docks controlled by his shipping companies, restaurants that laundered cash beneath candlelight in Chianti, a private chapel older than the city blocks around it, and farther out the warehouses where men disappeared when they forgot the rules. Fog rolled low over the water, swallowing and revealing the port in slow breaths. Salt, diesel, rain-soaked stone. Power had a smell. In Lorenzo's city, it smelled like the sea choking on gunpowder. He found her on the terrace just after noon, speaking on the phone in Italian so cold and precise it made the air feel sharper. "No trucks move through South Harbor without my clearance," he said. "If Nero touches one crate, I want names before sundown." He ended the call and handed her a compact pistol. Saraphina stared at it. "Is this a test?" "It's Tuesday. I don't want your gun. You don't want mine. You definitely want yours back. This is the compromise." She took it despite herself, feeling the solid weight settle in her palm. He watched her check the safety, clear the chamber, and hold it correctly with unhidden satisfaction. "You were military?" he asked. "No. Private training?" She looked out at the harbor. "Something like that." Lorenzo came to stand beside her. His shoulder nearly brushed hers. "My empire runs from the port to the garment district. Judges owe me favors. Union bosses owe me money. Half the city calls me a monster while taking my protection." His tone remained mild. "Nero wants my docks, my roots, and my name dragged through the mud before he kills me." "Why tell me?" "Because if you're staying in my house, you should understand which shadows have teeth." She almost laughed. "And you don't?" He turned then, looking at her fully. "I'm the darkest one in the room, Bella. That's the point." The truth of it should have repelled her. Instead, it did something worse. It made sense. By evening, he had moved her to the library because the room had fewer lines of attack. Of course it did. Everything in Lorenzo's life was war disguised as architecture. The library was warm with amber lamps, old leather, and cedar smoke from the fireplace. Family portraits lined one wall. Men with proud mouths and dead eyes. Women draped in pearls and silence. Saraphina found the hidden crack in Lorenzo's armor by accident. On a side table near the fire sat a framed photograph of a dark-haired woman at a piano, smiling faintly at someone outside the frame. Real warmth. Real life. "Your mother?" she asked. Lorenzo's expression changed at once, flattening into something carved. "Yes." Saraphina should have stopped. She didn't. "She looks kind." The silence that followed was not empty. It was packed with ghosts. "She was," he said at last. "Which is why she died." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. He took the photo from the table and set it face down. "I was 14. There was a meeting in this house. My father believed Mercy looked weak. My mother disagreed in front of the wrong men." His jaw hardened. "She was shot at midnight beside her piano, so every capo would remember who ruled this family." Saraphina forgot to breathe. The fire snapped softly. Orange light moved across his face, sharpening the brutal planes of it, catching the pain he almost never allowed to surface. For one impossible moment, the boss vanished, and only the boy remained. The boy who learned that love was punished, and softness buried. "My father died 3 years later," Lorenzo said. "No one asks how." She looked at him. "Did you kill him?" His gaze met hers over the shifting firelight. "Yes." The truth sat between them, terrible and clean. Instead of stepping back, Saraphina moved closer. She didn't know why. Maybe because grief recognized grief. Maybe because monsters were rarely born whole. Maybe because she understood too well what it meant to be built by fire. "My father died too," she said quietly. "In an arson the police called accidental." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "And you don't believe that? I know better. There. A shard of truth." He absorbed it without pushing. That restraint felt strangely intimate. more intimate than his hands on her had. From downstairs came sudden shouting. Rocco's voice. Running footsteps. Then the sharp crack of a gunshot from the garden. Lorenzo moved instantly, all softness erased. He shoved Saraphina behind the library desk and drew his weapon in one fluid motion. Stay down. She ignored him enough to crawl to the side window and look through the slit in the curtain. Moonlight silvered the garden paths. One of Lorenzo's guards lay face down near the fountain. Another fired toward the outer hedge. A shadow moved between the cypress trees. Left side, Saraphina snapped. Near the stone angel. Lorenzo fired through the glass without hesitation. A body dropped. He turned to her, surprised and sharp. How did you? A red dot appeared on his shirt. Sniper laser. Saraphina launched herself at him just as the window shattered. They hit the floor together while bullets chewed through books, wood, and family history. Paper snowed through the air. Smoke and dust filled her mouth. Lorenzo rolled over her, shielding her again, but she had already grabbed his fallen gun with one hand and sighted the terrace door with the other. A man came through. She fired once. He fell. The room went silent except for the alarm blaring through the mansion and the harsh sound of Lorenzo breathing above her. He stared down at her, something fierce and astonished in his face. You've killed before, he said. Saraphina's fingers tightened around the gun. No point lying now. Yes. The house thundered alive around them, guards storming halls, radios crackling, the scent of plaster dust and spent shells thick in the air. Down in the garden, headlights flashed beyond the gates. The attack had been coordinated, planned, personal. Lorenzo rose and pulled her with him. His grip swallowed her hand. Somewhere below, Matteo shouted, "We found a phone on the shooter." Burner with one text. Lorenzo looked toward the doorway. From who? Matteo's answer came hard and immediate. Unknown sender. But the message says, bring the girl out by midnight, or we burn the house with both of you inside. They moved her to the chapel, because Lorenzo trusted God less than stone. It stood apart from the main house on the cliffside, an old family sanctuary built of gray rock and candle soot, its stained glass saints glowing red and blue in the storm-dark night. The sea below battered the rocks in endless fury. Wind moaned through the olive trees. Inside, the air smelled of wax, incense, and rain dragged in on black coats. You keep me in a chapel now? Saraphina asked as Lorenzo bolted the heavy inner door behind them. I keep you where I can defend you. How romantic. His eyes cut to her. You shouldn't joke tonight. She crossed her arms. You shouldn't kidnap women. And yet here we are. Lightning flashed through the stained glass, painting his face in blood-red shards. He had changed again, this time into all black shoulder holster under his jacket, a knife sheathed at his spine. Beautifully armed, beautifully furious. Outside, his men were setting a perimeter. She heard engines, boots on gravel. The metallic clack of rifles checked in the dark. War music. On the chapel altar lay the burner phone taken from the shooter. Matteo had traced nothing useful. Rocco had found another dead guard in the orchard. Lorenzo's house was bleeding from somewhere inside. Saraphina paced the aisle to keep from shaking. Every candle flame threw long, restless shadows over the old stone floor. Her body still hummed with leftover terror from the attack in the library, the recoil of the gunshot vibrating in her hand like memory. Lorenzo watched her for a while before saying, You push fear into anger. So do you. I weaponize it better. She spun toward him. You want the truth? Fine. I was in your office because I was looking for proof. Not money, not jewels, proof. Of what? She hesitated only once, that Julian Nero ordered the fire that killed my father. The words opened something poisonous and old. Smoke filled her mind. Heat blistering her skin. Her father shoving her through a pantry window while shouting for her to run. The roof groaning. A man's silhouette in the blaze. Lorenzo's expression shifted. Not softer exactly, but intent. Your father's name, Cesare Valle. Recognition hit him hard. Cesare Valle was one of my father's capos, yes. Her chin lifted, and he was trying to leave the life. Lorenzo swore quietly in Italian. Before she could ask why, the chapel lights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. Instinct threw them together. Saraphina reached for her hidden ankle blade. Gone. Still confiscated. At the exact moment Lorenzo grabbed her waist and hauled her behind a stone column. Outside, men shouted. The first burst of gunfire lit the stained glass from beyond in white-hot flashes. Backup generator will kick in. He murmured against her hair. Unless someone cut that too, then they die tired. The generator did not kick in. A shape moved near the confessional. Saraphina felt Lorenzo tense. She tugged his sleeve once, pointed left though he could barely see her hand in the dark. He fired. The muzzle flash bloomed blue-white and showed a masked man crumpling against the pews. Then another attacker came through the side vestry door. Saraphina didn't think. She snatched the brass candlestick from the prayer stand and swung with both hands. It cracked against the man's wrist. His gun clattered away. Lorenzo finished him with a single vicious strike of his knife hand to the throat. Silence dropped again. Brutal. Breathing. Rain. Lorenzo turned to her, chest heaving once. His hands landed on her shoulders, checking for blood, wounds, certainty. Are you hit? No. His fingers tightened. Don't ever do that again. Hit the man trying to shoot you? Throw yourself into my fight. Anger flared. Maybe I'm tired of being treated like cargo. You are not cargo. The words came rougher than before, dragged out of someplace deeper. You are the reason half my house has become a battlefield. She opened her mouth to snap back, then saw it. Fear. Real fear. Buried under the rage. For her. The storm outside hammered harder. Wind shoved rain against the old chapel door. Candle smoke drifted through the dark in ribbons. Somewhere, a guard screamed and the sound cut off with sickening speed. Lorenzo took one step closer. Then another. His hands rose again, slower this time, cupping her face as though she were something breakable and sharp all at once. In the faint-colored light from the storm through the stained glass, his features looked carved from dusk. I should not want this, he said. Then don't. Too late. His mouth hit hers like a confession he'd been choking on for years. Not gentle, not cruel, necessary. The kiss burned. Tasted of smoke, rain, and restraint snapping apart. Saraphina made a sound she would deny forever, and grabbed his shirt, dragging him closer instead of pushing him away. He kissed like he fought, absolute, relentless, but with an undercurrent of control that made the heat more dangerous, not less. One of his hands slid to the back of her neck, thumb stroking just once, and the tenderness of it nearly ruined her. When he lifted his head, both of them were breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers. Bella. She had no idea what to do with the way he said it. Like worship. Like ruin. Outside, engines roared at the lower gate. Matteo's voice crackled from Lorenzo's earpiece. We intercepted one of Nero's men. He says they're not trying to kill her. Lorenzo went still. What are they trying to do? A pause. Static. Then, Matteo again. Grim. They want to take her alive. And Fabrizio just left the estate without clearance. Lorenzo's eyes turned glacial. My uncle, he said softly, stepping back at last. That is a very bad sign. Why? His jaw flexed once. Because my uncle never runs unless he's already lit the fire. He drew her into him with one arm and reached for the chapel door with the other. Stay behind me, he ordered. Lorenzo. He looked down at her, stormlight cutting across his face, kiss still alive between them like a wound. Then, he said the words that made something shatter open in her chest. I'll burn the world for you. The family arrived before dawn. Black cars climbed the winding drive beneath a sky the color of bruises. Men stepped out in dark wool and polished shoes, their faces stern with sleepless rage. Capos. Soldiers. Cousins. Priests of violence wrapped in expensive cloth. The war had begun in whispers, but the attack on Lorenzo's house turned whispers into summons. Saraphina watched from the upstairs gallery overlooking the great hall as Vitelli men filled the mansion with tension sharp enough to taste. Coffee. Wet coats, leather holsters, floor polish. Under it all, fear. Lorenzo stood at the foot of the staircase, receiving them like a king receiving tribute, one hand tucked behind his back, his wound hidden beneath a midnight suit. Matteo remained at his shoulder, pale from a night without rest but steady. Rocco patrolled the outer doors with a rifle cradled against his chest. No sign of Fabrizio. That absence spoke louder than any threat. Matteo came for Saraphina an hour later and escorted her to the small chapel inside the house. Not the cliffside one, but an older private room lined with votive candles and blackened icons. Lorenzo waited there alone. On the altar lay a silver knife, a crystal bowl, and a rosary made of onyx beads. "This doesn't look comforting," she said. "It isn't." His gaze held hers. "It is honest." He told her the rest. Cesare Valle had indeed served the Vitelli family. Years ago, he discovered Lorenzo's father, and several allies were trafficking girls through the harbor under cover of legitimate shipping. Cesare tried to take evidence to the authorities. Before he could, someone burned his house. The official blame fell on Nero men, but in the shadows, the story was never clean. "My father was capable of it," Lorenzo said. "So was Nero. And so was anyone who profited from the silence." Saraphina swallowed around a throat gone tight. "I came here to avenge him." "I know. Why didn't you say that from the start?" "Because I needed to know if you came for justice." He stepped closer. "Or me." The answer should have been simple. It wasn't anymore. Lorenzo took the silver knife and sliced his palm in one practiced motion. Bright blood welled. He did not so much as flinch. He held the knife out to her. "In this house," he said, "a blood oath means truth. No lies beneath God." Saraphina stared at the blade, then took it. The edge bit. Her own blood joined his in the bowl, dark and shining. He said, "What is your secret, Saraphina Vale?" She gave him the one that mattered most. "I was not only stealing proof." Her hand trembled once, then steadied. "I intended to kill Julian Nero with it in my pocket." Matteo would have reached for a gun. Rocco would have cursed. Lorenzo only watched her. Then, quietly, "Good." She blinked. "Good? I dislike amateur revenge," he said. "But I admire ambition." Despite everything, a broken laugh escaped her. The chapel door burst open. A young soldier stumbled in, blood on his sleeve. "Boss, garage breach." Lorenzo moved instantly. Saraphina followed despite his look. They ran through halls vibrating with alarm, down the back stairs into the stone motor court where smoke already curled from a blown SUV. Men shouted over the ringing in everyone's ears. The smell of gasoline and fire slammed into her. An attacker in catering whites emerged from behind a column, with a pistol aimed straight at Lorenzo's spine. Saraphina saw it first. She snatched a fallen guard's knife and threw. The blade buried itself in the shooter's throat. For one breathless second, the courtyard froze. Even the flames seemed to bow around the violence. Lorenzo turned, took in the dead man, then looked at her with stunned, savage pride. Madonna. The spell broke. More shots. Another man on the roofline. Rocco returned fire. Matteo dragged a wounded soldier behind the fountain. Saraphina dropped to one knee, grabbed the dead shooter's weapon, and fired 2 clean shots at the roof. One miss, one hit. The figure toppled backward into smoke. So much for pretending weakness. Afterward, while the injured were carried away and the dead laid beneath white sheets, Lorenzo drew her into his study and closed the door. The room smelled of charred air blown in from outside, leather, and his cologne. He looked almost angry, almost reverent. "You lied very well," he said. "I warned you I wasn't helpless. You omitted that you throw knives like a hired ghost. I omit lots of things." His laugh came low and disbelieving. "You are impossible, and you keep staring. Because I am reconsidering every reckless thought I've had about keeping you alive." She took a step closer. "Maybe I don't need your permission, no," he said, voice dropping. "But you have my attention, entirely." The heat between them surged again, edged now with battle-forged trust. He brushed his knuckles over the cut in her palm, then lifted her hand and kissed the center of it, right where her blood had mingled with his. The act was shockingly intimate, more intimate than their kiss in the chapel. Matteo knocked once and entered without waiting, his face grim. "We found Fabrizio's driver," he said. "Dead. And there's worse." Lorenzo straightened. "Say it." Matteo set a folder on the desk. Inside were photographs from the East Docks, one of Lorenzo's warehouses, one of a shipment manifest, one of a coded ledger entry. On the last page someone had written in black marker, "She was always the price, Saraphina went cold." Matteo looked from her to Lorenzo. Someone in the family knew exactly who she was before she entered the casino. Lorenzo's hand settled at the small of her back, protective and lethal all at once. "Then someone close to me," he said, every word carved in ice, "has signed their own death warrant." War did not announce itself with trumpets. It came as silence on the road to mass. Lorenzo insisted they leave the estate before sunset for the old harbor church, where a neutral meeting with 2 capos had been arranged. Neutrality in mafia language meant everyone brought guns and pretended civility until the first betrayal. Saraphina rode in the back of the armored sedan beside him, while rain smeared the city lights into gold and red streaks across the glass. "You can still turn around," she said, "and miss the chance to discover who wants us both dead." His arm rested along the seat behind her, not touching, caging. Never. The church sat between abandoned cannery buildings and the river, its bell tower leaning slightly, its front steps slick with rain. Candles glowed through warped stained glass. The air smelled of wet brick, tide rot, and incense old enough to have memory. Lorenzo's men spread out. Matteo went inside first. Rocco checked the side alley. Saraphina should have stayed in the car. Instead, she saw the glint on the roofline opposite the church and knew. Down. She shoved Lorenzo just as automatic fire erupted. The windshield starred. Rounds tore through the convoy. Men shouted. Tires blew. The world exploded into noise and shattered safety glass. Lorenzo yanked her out the far door and behind the stone wall edging the churchyard, while bullets chipped saints into dust above them. This was no meeting. It was an execution. Rocco went down with a shot through the shoulder, but kept firing from behind a marble angel. Matteo dragged one of the capos out of the church, only for the man's body to go limp, throat cut before the shooting even started. The neutral leaders were already dead. The ambush had been prepared down to the choir candles. Lorenzo became something terrible to watch. No hesitation, no wasted motion. He moved through the storm of gunfire with the terrifying precision of a man who had lived his whole life expecting betrayal. One shooter rushed the side gate. Lorenzo broke his wrist, stole his knife, and buried it under the man's jaw in the same breath. Another rounded the statue line. 2 shots. Center mass. Down. Blood sprayed rain black over Lorenzo's cheekbone. Saraphina saw his monster then, and God help her, she understood why men feared him. She fired from cover, dropped one attacker near the van, then another by the church door. Smoke burned her throat. Wet earth soaked the hem of her coat. Somewhere bells clanged crazily, struck by bullets or wind, turning the massacre into a twisted mass. Then Julian Nero himself stepped from the rectory shadows, smiling. He wore an immaculate navy coat and gloves despite the rain, his silvering hair slicked back, his expression smug as sin. He raised a gun, not at Lorenzo. At Saraphina. Lorenzo moved faster than thought. He threw himself between them. The shot hit his upper arm and spun him sideways. Rage unlike anything Saraphina had ever known detonated inside her. She rose from behind the wall and fired until Nero vanished back into cover, one of his men collapsing across the rectory steps with half his face gone. Lorenzo. He hit the church doors hard, pushing them open with his shoulder. She caught him inside as Matteo and Rocco laid down fire from the yard. Candles trembled along the nave. Rain and gun smoke rolled through the old sanctuary. Blood soaked Lorenzo's sleeve. He gripped the front of her coat with his good hand, dragging her close enough that their foreheads nearly slammed together. "Do not," he said through clenched teeth. Ever make me watch a gun pointed at you again? You took a bullet for me. I'd take 1,000. The words struck harder than the shots outside. She pressed him into a pew, tore open his sleeve and checked the wound. Through and through. Painful, bloody, survivable. He watched her work with pupils blown wide from adrenaline and something hotter. I saw you, she whispered. What? The real you. He laughed once, ragged. And you're still here, as if I could leave now. Gunfire thundered closer. Somebody was trying the sacristy door. Lorenzo caught her blood-streaked hand and kissed the inside of her wrist. Mine. She should have flinched. Instead, she answered with the truth she had fought for too long. Yours. His eyes shut for one brutal second, like the word hit him somewhere ancient. Then he pulled her down into a kiss that tasted of rain, blood, and surrender freely given. When they broke apart, their breaths mingled in the cold church air. I love you, he said roughly, like the words had claws. I did not intend to. I do not know how to do it gently. But I love you, Saraphina. Everything inside her went still. Outside, war screamed. Inside, only this mattered. She cupped his face, uncaring that her hands were smeared with blood. Then hear me clearly, Lorenzo Vitelli. I love you too. For one suspended heartbeat, the church held them like a vow. Later, after Matteo and Rocco forced a retreat route through the crypt and the surviving men regrouped at a safe house above the docks, the night turned quieter but no less dangerous. In a narrow room lit by one lamp and the distant sweep of harbor lights, Saraphina helped Lorenzo out of his ruined shirt, bruises, scars, fresh bandages, a map of every war he had survived. He touched her as though memorizing her. No urgency now. Only wonder sharpened by terror nearly realized. Their first intimate joining was slow, reverent, full of foreheads pressed together, and whispered names in the dark. No possession taken, only chosen. His palm over the cut on her hand, her mouth over the scar near his ribs. Promise in every breath. Afterward, he held her against his heartbeat while the city burned below the window. Matteo entered without knocking, because peace never lasted. Nero hit our east docks, the garment district, and 2 judges under our protection, he said. His face was ash pale. He sent a message to every family. Lorenzo sat up, Saraphina still wrapped in his arm. What message? Matteo's jaw hardened. War is coming. By morning the city belonged to sirens. South Harbor smoked. 2 Vitelli clubs were firebombed before dawn. A judge under Lorenzo's protection was found hanging from a bridge with his wedding ring stuffed in his mouth. Every neighborhood Lorenzo controlled woke to broken windows, burned cars, and men with guns pretending not to panic. The newspapers would call it gang violence by lunch. By dinner, half the city council would be begging Lorenzo to restore order through unofficial means. He did, brutally. From the war room in an abandoned customs house overlooking the docks, Lorenzo issued death in calm, efficient sentences. Maps covered the walls. Red pins marked Nero property. Black pins marked bodies. The place smelled of coffee left too long on the burner, damp concrete, ink, and the metallic edge of impending slaughter. Saraphina stood beside him all day, not because he wanted her near the danger, but because every safer location had already been compromised. She wore black pants, a shoulder holster, and the expression of a woman who had stopped pretending the blood around her was temporary. Pier 9 is clear, Rocco reported, shoulder bandaged, eyes fever bright with battle. But Nero men are using church routes in Little Palermo. Burn the routes, Lorenzo said. Matteo, exhausted and grim, set down a fresh stack of intercepted calls. And the aldermen? Bought. The union heads? Bought cheaper. For a moment, despite the firestorm around them, Saraphina almost smiled. This was Lorenzo at full command, ice in human shape, turning chaos into a weapon. Terrifying, magnificent, doomed if one more person close to him proved false. She felt that doom an hour later. A delivery boy arrived at the customs house carrying pastries from a bakery Lorenzo used. Ordinary enough. The box smelled of sugar, orange peel and warm dough. Rocco nearly waved it through. Saraphina noticed the wax seal. Wrong crest. Don't open. The blast threw everyone to the floor. Smoke punched through the room. Glass burst inward. Heat ripped across Saraphina's face as the pastry box became fire and nails and murderous intent. Her ears rang. Somewhere men were shouting, one voice missing words she could no longer hear. Strong arms hauled her behind a steel desk. Lorenzo. He was bleeding from the forehead, fury blazing in his eyes as dust and cinders rained over them. Are you hurt? I'm fine, she coughed, not fine at all. Across the room, Matteo pushed himself upright, and then Saraphina saw the blood. Too much. Too dark. A jagged piece of metal had buried itself beneath his ribs. Lorenzo saw it a heartbeat later. No. The single word cracked. They got Matteo onto the floor near the wall, while Rocco and the remaining soldiers secured the building. Smoke coiled through the broken windows. The harbor beyond flashed white under a merciless noon sun, indecently bright against all that blood. Matteo laughed weakly when Lorenzo pressed both hands over the wound. You look terrible, Lo. Shut up. Good. There he is. Saraphina knelt beside them, fingers slick, heartbreaking. Matteo had been with Lorenzo longer than anyone. Friend. Brother. Conscience when conscience still mattered. You need a doctor, she said. Matteo looked at her, and in his tired eyes she saw perfect understanding. He knew. They all knew. Listen to me, he whispered to Lorenzo. It's not Rocco. It's not the judges. It's inside the bloodline. Lorenzo bent closer. Who? But Matteo was already fading. His gaze found Saraphina once more. Don't let him become what they made him. Then he exhaled. And did not inhale again. Silence swallowed the room. Lorenzo stayed bent over him for one endless moment, hands stained red, head bowed, not in surrender, but in something more dangerous. Grief distilled into vengeance. When he finally straightened, his face had gone frighteningly calm. Lock every bridge, he said. Rocco swallowed hard. Boss. Every bridge, Lorenzo repeated. No one leaves my city. The rest of the day became ruin. Vitelli men stormed Nero gambling dens, warehouses, safe apartments. 2 went up in flames. 3 more emptied of breathing occupants. Lorenzo killed with the precision of a priest administering sacraments. Once, in a fish market on the wharf, Saraphina watched him put a bullet through a man's kneecap before calmly asking where Fabrizio had been last night. The man answered before the second shot. Fabrizio had been seen with Nero's consigliere. Betrayal inside the bloodline. By dusk, Saraphina's clothes smelled like smoke, salt water, and death. Lorenzo had barely spoken except to command. The grief under his skin made him look carved from winter. They were supposed to move locations after dark. Supposed to relocate to the underground wine tunnels beneath the old Vitelli restaurant. They never made it. As Saraphina crossed the alley behind the customs house with Rocco on one side and 2 soldiers behind her, a black van screeched through the gate. Gunfire erupted from the roofline. 1 soldier dropped instantly. Rocco spun, firing. Someone grabbed Saraphina from behind, a chloroform-soaked cloth slamming over her mouth. She bit hard enough to taste blood and rammed her heel backward, but another arm clamped around her waist. Across the alley, Lorenzo turned at the sound of her muffled scream. Their eyes met. He started toward her. Too far. Too many bullets. The last thing Saraphina saw before darkness surged in was Lorenzo Vitelli tearing through gunfire with murder in his face while she was dragged into the van. Separated by force. Taken. She woke to dripping water and rust. The room was underground, or near enough. Concrete walls sweating salt. A single naked bulb swinging from exposed wire. The smell was a layered nightmare. Seawater, mold, oil, old blood. Her wrists were bound in front of her with zip ties, ankles lashed to a metal chair. Her cheek throbbed. Her split lip tasted of iron. A door scraped open. Julian Nero entered first, elegant as ever in a dark overcoat. silver cufflinks catching the weak light. He carried cruelty like a gentleman's habit. Behind him came Fabrizio Vitelli, Lorenzo's uncle, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the same aristocratic bones as his nephew and none of the soul. Saraphina felt the truth settle like ice in her blood before either man spoke. Fabrizio smiled. "There you are," he said. "The girl who ruined everything." Saraphina laughed despite the pain. "That fragile, was it?" Julian circled her slowly. "Still sharp. Lorenzo likes that. What does Lorenzo do with traitors?" she asked Fabrizio. "I'm curious." Something ugly flickered in the older man's eyes. Jealousy, ancient and festering. "He inherited a throne that should have been guided by wiser hands," Fabrizio said. "Instead, he grew sentimental. First with Matteo, then with you." The room swayed slightly as Saraphina tested the chair bolts with tiny movements. Old, corroded, maybe useful. Julian crouched in front of her. "We could be civilized. Tell us where Lorenzo hid the port ledger." She smiled bloodily. "Try hell." He struck her once. Open hand, meant to humiliate more than harm. She turned her face back slowly. "That all?" Fabrizio watched with cold interest. Her father had the same mouth, so it had been true. Not random fire, not vague collusion, family. "Why?" she asked. Fabrizio clasped his hands behind his back. "Because Cesare Valle wanted to expose a business arrangement. Girls, shipping, men with appetites and influence. Your father forgot that in our world, morality is just bad strategy." Rage burned clean through her. "And Gabriel?" she asked before she could stop herself. Julian's smile widened. "The firefighter Fianc? Such a noble boy." Saraphina went still. He knew the name, which meant, "Yes," Julian said softly. "The warehouse fire 2 years ago was ours too. He was in the wrong place. Died very bravely. For a second she could not hear anything. Not the drip of water, not the sea beyond the walls, not her own breath. Only Gabriel's laugh in memory, warm and young, promising her a world outside blood and smoke before he ran back into the blaze that took him. Fabrizio leaned close enough for her to smell expensive cologne overwrought. "Lorenzo can possess you, but he will never have the part of you that belonged to the dead. I imagine that torments him. The bastard was right." And for the first time she understood the title of the wound between her and Lorenzo. Not obsession. Jealousy of ghosts. Above them, faintly, came the muffled rumble of engines. "Lorenzo." Julian heard it too and swore. "He found us." "Of course he did," Saraphina whispered. The slap this time split the corner of her mouth again. Julian rose, furious. "You think he can save you? I know he'll kill you." The men left in a rush of orders. She worked the zip ties against the jagged edge of broken metal hidden beneath the chair arm. Back and forth. Back and forth. Pain slicing into her skin. No time. No breath to spare. Cut. The ties snapped. Upstairs, or somewhere above, gunfire erupted. Heavy, sustained, getting closer fast. The whole structure trembled. Saraphina freed her ankles, rose too quickly, and nearly collapsed. She grabbed the chair for balance, then stripped the bulb from the socket, plunging the room into darkness. Footsteps pounded toward the door. She stood beside it, breathing through her teeth, bulb base gripped like a knife. The first guard entered with a flashlight. She smashed the glass bulb into his throat and took his gun before he hit the floor. The second came cursing. She fired twice. Then the outer wall shuddered with a blast so violent dust poured from the ceiling. Lorenzo was inside. She ran into a corridor of corrugated steel and concrete emergency lights flashing red. Men shouted in Italian. Smoke rolled low. Somewhere ahead, Rocco roared like an animal and automatic fire answered him. Saraphina turned left and ran straight into Fabrizio. He held a pistol. She held one too. Both fired. His shot grazed her shoulder in a burst of white-hot agony. Hers tore through his side. He stared at her with genuine surprise. "Little viper, you should have killed me when I was 13, she hissed. He smiled through blood. I tried. A shadow hit him from the side. Lorenzo. He drove Fabrizio into the wall with such force concrete cracked. The pistol skidded away. Fabrizio laughed, choking on blood, while Lorenzo's fists landed once, twice, each blow fueled by a lifetime of betrayal. You killed my mother, Lorenzo said. Fabrizio grinned with red teeth. No, your father gave the order. I simply enjoyed it. The confession froze the corridor. Lorenzo's face became something beyond fury, beyond grief, a void where mercy had once been buried. Fabrizio saw it too. You're no different from us, boy. No, Lorenzo said, voice dead calm. I'm worse. He reached for the knife at his back, and somewhere deeper in the compound, an alarm began counting down in cold electronic beeps. Explosives. Saraphina turned toward the sound, blood running warm down her arm, smoke thickening in the red-lit corridor. Almost too late. The countdown hit 40 seconds. Everything after that moved like fate breaking its own neck. Rocco. Lorenzo shouted. East Tunnel. Came the answer through smoke and chaos. Fabrizio slumped bleeding against the wall, still alive, still smiling, while Lorenzo seized Saraphina with one arm and half-dragged, half-carried her through the collapsing corridor. The compound shook under another explosion. Metal shrieked. Salt water sprayed through a ruptured pipe. Behind them, Julian Nero's men were either dead or dying under the Vitelli assault. Saraphina stumbled, forcing herself forward. Put me down, I can run. You're bleeding, so are you? Then we're matching. Even now, a shard of savage humor. It nearly broke her. They burst into a loading bay open to the night sea, where cargo pallets blazed and bodies lay scattered across slick concrete. Harbor wind slapped smoke across their faces. Beyond the loading bay, an access road led to black water and freedom. Rocco was there with 2 remaining soldiers, laying down fire toward a raised catwalk. Julian Nero stood on that catwalk with a detonator in one hand and a shotgun in the other. Touching reunion, he called down. I'd applaud if time allowed. Lorenzo shoved Saraphina behind a forklift and stepped in front of her automatically, gun raised. Nero smiled. There it is, the grand love story. You know what I enjoy most, Lorenzo? It isn't your power. It's how easy it is to make you feel. Rocco fired first. Nero ducked. Shotgun blast answered. One soldier went down. The detonator slipped from Nero's hand, skidding under the catwalk rail. Saraphina saw the angle before anyone else. Cover me. Lorenzo turned, horrified. No. Yes. She ran anyway. Bullets sparked off steel as she sprinted across the loading bay, boots splashing through seawater and blood. Nero shouted. Lorenzo cursed with such inventive fury that under other circumstances she might have laughed. She dove beneath the catwalk just as Nero fired downward. Pellets chewed metal above her back. Her wounded shoulder screamed. The detonator lay inches away. A boot stepped beside it. Fabrizio. He had followed, one hand clamped to his side, face gray with blood loss and hate. Enough, he rasped. Saraphina looked up from the concrete and saw death in 2 old Italian shoes. Before Fabrizio could bend, she shot him through the knee. He collapsed, roaring. She grabbed the detonator and rolled clear as Lorenzo's gun barked from across the bay. Fabrizio's head snapped back. The old traitor fell still at last, but Julian Nero was already descending the far stairs. Shotgun discarded, knife in hand, fleeing toward the docked speedboat outside. Lorenzo moved like a storm given human form. He hit Nero halfway down the stairs. Both men crashed into the railing, fists, elbows, fury. Steel rang. The scent of brine and smoke and blood turned the night primitive. Saraphina staggered upright, clutching the detonator in one hand and her pistol in the other, but the fight moved too fast for a clean shot. Nero slashed Lorenzo across the ribs. Lorenzo broke Nero's wrist. Nero headbutted him. Lorenzo drove him into the railing so hard it bent. Lorenzo. She shouted. Nero twisted, yanked a backup blade from his boot, and drove it toward Lorenzo's throat. Saraphina fired. The bullet tore through Nero's shoulder and spun him off balance. That opening was all Lorenzo needed. He grabbed Julian Nero by the collar and the belt, lifted him bodily, and hurled him over the catwalk rail. Nero hit the concrete below, badly. One wet crack, one scream, then silence except for the sea. For a second, nobody moved. Then Lorenzo was across the loading bay, hands on Saraphina's face, her shoulders, her sides, checking, counting, making sure she was real. His own breathing was savage. There was blood at his temple, blood on his mouth, blood everywhere. But his eyes, those impossible eyes, were alive only because she was. She started shaking all at once. He dragged her into his arms. She went willingly, collapsing against him, breathing in smoke, salt, and the familiar dangerous scent of home she'd found in the last man on earth she should have loved. He held her so tight it bordered on pain. She held him just as fiercely. "I thought," she began, then couldn't finish. "I know," his mouth pressed into her hair. "Never again." Tears came hot and humiliating. He kissed them from her cheeks as if they were holy. "Never leaving you again," he said. Rocco approached, limping. "Boss." Lorenzo didn't look away from her. "What?" Rocco swallowed. "Nero's alive." "Barely. Says he wants to trade for mercy." Lorenzo's expression turned glacial. "He doesn't get mercy, there's more." Rocco glanced at the dead Fabrizio, then back. "Nero says Fabrizio wasn't the architect. Just the knife. The order came from someone older. Before him." Saraphina went cold. "Who?" Lorenzo demanded. Rocco answered with obvious disbelief. "Your father's old confessor, Father Benedetto. He ran messages between families for years. He's waiting at the midnight chapel, the old priest, the family confessor, the man who heard sins and sold absolution like currency." Saraphina looked at Lorenzo and saw the same realization hit them both. The war had never been only about territory. It had been about confession, secrecy, and the men who profited from both. Lorenzo took her hand, blood and all, and laced their fingers together. "One of us might die tonight," he said. Saraphina tightened her grip. "Then we make sure it's not us." Midnight waited in the chapel, the same cliffside chapel where Lorenzo had kissed her, where he had promised to burn the world for her. Now it stood under a moon sharp as a blade, waves smashing the rocks below in white fury. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed cold and silver. Men ringed the hillside among the cypress trees, Vitelli soldiers silent as tombs. No sirens, no witnesses. This was family business, which meant God could look and no one else was invited. Inside, candlelight flickered over old saints and older sins. Father Benedetto stood at the altar in black vestments, his lined hands folded around a rosary. He looked harmless, which made him monstrous. Saraphina had seen men like him before, those who let others do the killing and called themselves clean. On the altar lay a ledger, a confession book, and a silver pistol. Lorenzo entered first, coat open over fresh bandages, gun low at his side. Saraphina walked beside him despite every protest he had made in the car. Her shoulder was wrapped, her mouth still split, her resolve untouched. The priest smiled sadly. "You always were your mother's son." Dramatic. Lorenzo stopped at the first pew. "You heard her confession the night before she died." Father Benedetto lowered his eyes. "She begged me to protect you, and instead, I protected the family." Saraphina hated how steady the old man sounded, as if decades of corruption had polished every edge from his conscience. Incense drifted through the chapel in ghostly threads. Wax and salt, and the distant thunder of the sea wrapped the moment in ritual. The priest touched the ledger. "Cesare Vol brought proof of the trafficking routes to me first. I passed word to the appropriate parties. My father," Lorenzo said, "and Fabrizio, and Nero. Men who understood order requires sacrifice." Saraphina's fingers curled around her pistol. "You burned children for order." The priest finally looked at her. "No, my child. Men burned children. I merely failed to stop them." Cowardice dressed as philosophy. Lorenzo stepped forward, You also arranged the warehouse fire that killed Gabriel Ashford. Something flickered in Benedetto's face then. Not guilt. Annoyance at being known. He had begun asking questions, the priest said. The boy loved unwisely. Saraphina felt rage steady her hand. Lorenzo glanced at her once. A silent question. With me? She answered with the smallest nod. Always. Benedetto sighed and lifted the silver pistol from the altar. Men shifted outside the chapel. Wind rattled the stained glass. The old priest aimed, not at Lorenzo, at Saraphina. Lorenzo moved. So did she. His shot hit the priest's shoulder. Hers hit his chest. Benedetto stumbled backward into the altar. Absolutely. Here is the continuation with Chapter 11 and Chapter 12 in the same dark, cinematic mafia romance audiobook style. It was finally over. Not quietly, not cleanly, but over. Father Benedetto had died on the chapel floor with blood spreading across consecrated stone, whispering broken prayers no one cared to hear. Julian Nero lasted until dawn, long enough to understand exactly how complete his defeat was. Lorenzo didn't give him a dramatic end. Men like Nero didn't deserve theater. They deserved certainty. By sunrise, the city had already begun to rearrange itself around the absence of its dead. Smoke still lingered over South Harbor. The morning air carried salt, wet ash, diesel, and the yeasty warmth of bakeries stubborn enough to open after bloodshed. Men washed last night's gore from alley stones with hoses, while women in black stood on church steps speaking in low voices about funerals and fate. Shopkeepers lifted their shutters. Delivery trucks rolled. Sirens faded. Life returned, because in cities ruled by old crime, life always returned. It simply learned new names for fear. Saraphina stood on the terrace outside Lorenzo's bedroom, with a cup of espresso warming her hands, and watched the harbor glitter under a pale winter sun. Her shoulder still ached. Her lip was healing. Her heart, strangely, impossibly, felt steadier than it had in years. Behind her, Lorenzo adjusted the cuff of his black shirt and came to stand at her back. He did that often now. Not sneaking. Not hovering. Anchoring. His hand slid around her waist, slow and familiar, and rested there as if her body had always known its place against his. You're thinking too loudly. She smiled into the coffee. You can hear thoughts now? I can hear yours. His voice was rougher in the mornings, richer, touched by sleep. It did things to her she no longer bothered pretending to resist. She leaned back into him, feeling the solid heat of his chest, the faint drag of stubble when he bent and pressed his mouth just below her ear. The sea wind lifted her hair. Down below, men crossed the courtyard with fresh flowers for the chapel and ledgers for the office. Business and mourning. In Lorenzo's world, they lived in the same house. Rocco says the last of Nero's lieutenants ran to Jersey before dawn, Saraphina said. They won't get far. No. He turned her then, gentle even in possession, and took the cup from her hands to set it on the stone ledge. His gaze moved over her face with the same impossible intensity that had first frightened her in the casino. Only now she knew what lived beneath it. Not just hunger, not just control. Devotion. The dangerous kind. You should be resting, he said. You've said that 6 times. I'll say it 12. You're insufferable. And yet, he kissed her. Briefly. Deep enough to pull the breath from her lungs. When he lifted his head, she saw the shadow still there beneath his eyes. Grief. Matteo's absence had not softened with victory. It had sharpened, settling into the bones of the house like a permanent winter. Later that afternoon they buried him. The Vitelli family cemetery overlooked the water from a hill lined with cypress and stone angels weathered smooth by salt wind. Men stood in black coats, heads bowed, hands clasped before them, or hidden near their weapons out of habit. The priest spoke. Rocco cried without shame. Lorenzo did not cry at all. That hurt more to watch. Saraphina stood beside him while the coffin was lowered, and the first fistfuls of earth thudded onto polished wood. Damp soil, cold wind, beeswax from the memorial candles, white lilies opening their heavy sweet scent into the bitter air. When the others drifted back toward the cars, Lorenzo stayed. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Without looking at her, Matteo used to tell me I mistook survival for living." She slipped her hand into his. Was he right? Yes. Lorenzo's fingers tightened around hers. Then you came into my office with a knife and terrible timing. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. He turned at last, eyes dark and honest. He would have liked that you made me difficult. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It's the highest one I have. The sun was slipping lower by the time they returned to the mansion. The house had changed in subtle ways over the last days. Fresh guards at the gates. New codes at the doors. Benedetto's ledger locked in Lorenzo's safe now, every name in it becoming leverage, justice, or a grave depending on what the city required. Fabrizio's portrait had been removed from the hall. No empty space remained. It had been replaced by a painting of Lorenzo's mother seated at her piano. That mattered. After dinner, Lorenzo summoned the remaining capos to the great room. Saraphina entered with him at his side, dressed in black silk and a strand of old pearls one of the house staff had pressed into her hands with trembling reverence. Candles burned low in the chandeliers. Firelight rolled over carved wood and crystal decanters. The men rose when Lorenzo entered. And then, to her surprise, so did the women. Wives, sisters, widows, the hidden spine of the empire. Lorenzo stopped before the hearth, one hand lightly at Saraphina's back. My uncle betrayed this family, he said. Father Benedetto sold our confessions for profit. Nero is dead. The erupts are mine again. The judges are secured. The harbor is sealed. His voice carried like velvet over steel. From this night on, Saraphina Vale stands under my protection, my authority, and my name if she chooses it. A murmur moved through the room. Not shock, not dissent, recognition. One of the oldest capos, Giovanni Santoro, gave the smallest nod. If she hadn't saved you twice, we'd be burying you too. Rocco, arm in a sling, smirked. And if she hadn't shot Fabrizio, I'd still be chasing ghosts in a freezer. A few grim laughs, enough to ease the tension. Then an older woman stepped forward from near the back, Lucia Santoro, widowed aunt, feared patron saint of family politics. She took Seraphina's chin between cool, ringed fingers and studied her hard enough to make lesser people tremble. You have a fighter's eyes, Lucia said. So I'm told. Lucia's mouth twitched. Good. He'll need someone willing to tell him when he's being an idiot. The room broke into relieved, low laughter. Acceptance in this world was never soft. But it was real. Lorenzo's hand pressed more firmly to Seraphina's back as if he understood exactly what had just been given. Much later, when the house had quieted and moonlight washed silver through the bedroom windows, Seraphina found him in the private chapel off the east corridor. No guards, no advisors, only Lorenzo, kneeling in the half-dark with a small velvet box, a silver pistol, and the same onyx rosary from the blood oath resting on the altar. He rose when she entered. I was wondering when you'd finally say something dramatic, she said softly. His gaze traveled over her face, reverent and unguarded. There are dramatic things. Then there are true things. She went closer, the scent of wax and old incense wrapping around them like memory. Candlelight touched the sharp lines of his face, softened the brutality without erasing it. He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a ring of black diamonds around a single white one bright as a star. Then he placed the silver pistol beside it. Then, without breaking eye contact, he drew a knife from inside his jacket and sliced his palm. Lorenzo. In this family, he said quietly, blood slipping over his skin, a vow worth keeping costs something. He handed her the knife. Her heart turned over hard. She cut her palm too. Their blood met over the altar. His voice dropped to a midnight confession, rough with the emotion he never let anyone else hear. You're the only woman who's ever made me jealous, Saraphina. She stared at him. Jealous of what? Everything. His laugh was soft and wrecked. The dead man who loved you first. The life you might have had without me. Every memory that belongs to your past and not my hands. He stepped closer, his blood mixing with hers, eyes burning. I have ruled men my whole life. Nothing ever made me envy before you." Something inside her cracked open with terrible tenderness. She touched his face. "Lorenzo." He lowered himself to one knee. "Take the ring," he said. "Take the gun. Take my name, my house, my city, and every enemy left breathing in it. Marry me, Bella." A pause. Then the wicked glint returned, just enough to make her breath hitch. "Or I'll kidnap you again and save us both the delay." Her laugh broke through tears. Then she put the ring on. Yes. His head bowed once, like a man hit by grace. When he rose, he kissed her slowly, deeply, with blood still damp on both their hands and forever bright between them. Outside the chapel door, the house remained silent. Inside it, a queen had just been crowned. 9 months later, the city lit candles for them. Not publicly, of course. Men like Lorenzo Vitelli did not put wedding notices in newspapers. But by dusk, every church in Little Palermo knew. Every florist, every tailor, every bakery that had ever delivered cannoli to a wake and champagne cake to a christening for the same family. The harbor buzzed with whispers. The king was marrying his queen. The woman who had bled for him. The woman who had survived him. The woman who had changed him. The wedding took place at twilight in the cliffside chapel. Where else? The sea below thundered against the rocks as if applauding. Hundreds of candles burned inside, gilding the old stone in molten gold. White roses climbed the altar with black ribbon woven through the stems. Incense drifted beneath the vaulted ceiling. Violin music floated soft and aching through the chapel, while guards in formal black lined the path outside, armed beneath tailored jackets, because romance in their world always came with contingency plans. Saraphina stood in the small dressing room at the rear of the chapel, while Lucia Santoro adjusted the fall of her veil, with unexpectedly gentle hands. The gown was ivory, not pure white. She had laughed at the suggestion of pretending innocence, but it clung to her like moonlight and shadow, silk skimming the curves Lorenzo worshipped. The back dipping low enough to reveal the small scar near her shoulder where Fabrizio's bullet had kissed her. And failed. Around her throat lay Lorenzo's mother's pearls. At her finger gleamed the black and white ring he had given her with a gun and a blood oath. "You look dangerous," Lucia said approvingly. "Good." Lucia's eyes dropped to Seraphina's middle, where the silk hinted at the gentlest curve. Not obvious yet, barely there, but known, protected, precious. "Have you told him?" Seraphina smiled, slow and secret. "Not yet." Lucia let out a delighted little huff. "Cruel girl. Learned from the best." Outside, the bells began to ring. When the chapel doors opened, every sound inside her stilled. Lorenzo waited at the altar in a black suit cut so perfectly it might have been poured over him. No tie, white shirt open at the throat, a silver cross at his collarbone. He looked exactly as he had the night she first saw him above the casino. Beautiful, lethal, impossible, except for one extraordinary difference. His eyes held peace. Not softness. He would never be soft, not fully, but peace. A hard-won stillness carved from love, grief, vengeance, and the savage relief of having kept what mattered. Rocco stood to one side with a scar across his jaw now, and a smirk that announced he intended to heckle the groom later. Giovanni Santoro stood on the other side in solemn witness. The pews held capos, widows, cousins, allies, and 100 quiet stories of loyalty. Even the city seemed to pause outside the chapel walls. Seraphina took her first step. Then another. The chapel smelled of roses, wax, sea salt, and polished wood. Candlelight shimmered across stained glass and made Lorenzo's eyes burn amber. Halfway down the aisle, he stopped pretending restraint and came toward her himself. A murmur ran through the guests. He didn't care. He reached her, took both her hands, and looked at her like a starving man offered heaven. "I was supposed to wait," he murmured. "You've never been good at that?" "No." His gaze softened with wicked devotion. "Especially where you're concerned." The ceremony itself was brief, sacred, violently sincere. The priest asked the formal questions. Lorenzo answered in a voice that shook only once. When it was Seraphina's turn, she did not promise obedience. She promised loyalty, truth, and blood, if blood was required. That earned a low approving rumble from half the chapel. Then came the Vitelli vow. Lorenzo produced the silver pistol from beneath the altar cloth and laid it beside their joined hands. The same one from the proposal, the same symbol. Protection, vengeance, inheritance. Next came the knife. A shallow cut to his palm, a shallow cut to hers. Blood met. From this night, Lorenzo said, eyes locked on hers, my life is yours to command, my house is yours to rule, and my enemies are yours to bury. Saraphina's throat tightened. She answered, from this night, your name is mine to defend, your darkness mine to know, and your heart mine to keep, whether you deserve it or not. A laugh broke through the guests, warm, startled, real. Then Lorenzo kissed her. Not politely, not carefully, not like a man before witnesses, like a man who had fought through fire, betrayal, ghosts, and his own ruin to earn one impossible thing, his wife. When the chapel erupted in applause and the bells went wild overhead, the sound rolled out across the cliffside, over the estate, down to the harbor and the city beyond. Fireworks were impossible on a night requiring discretion, so instead the docks answered with ship horns from 3 Vitelli vessels below, a deep triumphant chorus over the dark water. Later, at the reception in the great hall, the world grew warmer. Music. Crystal. Laughter edged with old danger. Tables heaped with roasted meats, citrus salads, sugared pastries, black olive bread still steaming when torn open. The scent of rosemary and garlic, wine and vanilla, beeswax and expensive perfume filled the air. Women danced barefoot past midnight. Men argued politics over grappa and embraced like brothers after threatening each other over card games. Lorenzo kept finding her in every room, a hand at her waist, a kiss stolen behind a velvet curtain, a look from across the crowd so heated it made her pulse stumble. Possession had matured in him. It was no less fierce, only deeper now. Less about locking her away, more about building a world where she could stand beside him and never have to bow. Near midnight, he drew her onto the terrace overlooking the sea. Full circle. Wind curled through her veil and teased loose dark strands from her hair. Below them, the harbor lights trembled on black water. Somewhere inside, Rocco began loudly losing money at cards. The city smelled alive, salt, chimney smoke, oranges from the reception tables, and the cold, bright edge of coming winter. Lorenzo slid his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. Married, he said, as if testing the taste of it. You sound surprised. I'm amazed you went through with it, she leaned back against him. You did threaten kidnapping. I would have followed through, I know. He turned her gently until she faced him. His thumb traced the new gold band beside her ring. Are you happy, Bella? She looked at the man who had once pinned her to a marble column and told her she wasn't going anywhere. At the monster who had learned to grieve, confess, kneel, and love with his whole ruined heart. Yes, she said. And you? His smile came slow and devastating. For the first time in my life, I don't feel jealous of the dead. Emotion rose sharp in her chest. She took his hand and placed it low against her belly. At first he frowned, not understanding. Then everything in his face changed. The sea seemed to pause. The wind. The world. Saraphina. Very early, she whispered. Lucia guessed. I wanted you to hear it from me tonight. He dropped to his knees so suddenly she gasped, laughing through tears. Lorenzo Vitelli, feared by judges and killers, pressed his forehead reverently against the silk over the smallest beginning of their child, and closed his eyes. When he looked up, his expression was wrecked with wonder. Mine, he said hoarsely. She threaded her fingers through his hair. Ours. He rose, gathered her into his arms, and kissed her with slow, aching joy while bells from the distant harbor chapel began to ring the midnight hour. The same hour he had once confessed jealousy. Now it belonged to something else. Not envy, not fear. Forever. And when he carried her back inside through the golden doors of their house, into the warmth, the music, the blood-built empire that was now also a home, Saraphina thought of the first night in the casino, the gunshots, the shattered glass, the command in his voice. You're not going anywhere. He had been right. Neither of them were. They were bound by vow, by blood, by love hard-won and eternal. King and queen, monster and miracle. His, hers, forever bound.